is that they've managed to use the UN Security Council as a forum for airing disinformation. But these are the same kind of, lies, allegations that have been circulating for many years.
Okay, if we're talking the United States, that what Russia is doing is engaged in a false flag operation with the aim of deploying its own biological and chemical weapons in Ukraine, what does Russia have at its disposal?
So Russia, as we know, has Molotov agent, which it used in the attempted assassination of Sergei Skripal in the United Kingdom several years ago, and again in the attempted murder of Alexei Navalny in 2020. So we know that Russia has this very deadly nerve agent, which is now banned under the Chemical Weapons Convention. And there's also a good amount of evidence that Russia has not only maintained but upgraded the secret military microbiology facilities that they carried from the Soviet Union that were part of the Soviet Union's weapons program. That these facilities are still in operation, they're still secret, and they've actually been upgraded over the years. So Russia has both chemical and biological capabilities they could have employed if they chose to do so.
That was Greg Koblenz from the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington, D.C. You're listening to the BBC World Service. This is NewsZone. And still to come, former Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko gives a chilling verdict on how he thinks the war in his country will end.
Will end until instances either we teach lost Russian soldier from Ukraine, and there's another option, or finishes with lost Ukrainian hero guys.
The latest headlines from the BBC Newsroom that the G7 group of leading industrialized countries and the European Union are to strip Russia of trade benefits to further isolate Moscow over its war in Ukraine. The new disarmament chief says she has no evidence to support a Russian allegation that Ukraine has conducted dangerous biological experiments. This is Julian Marshall, NewsHour live from the BBC in London. Earlier in the week on NewsHour, we spoke several times to a young woman who was trying to escape the fighting in the city of Sumy in northeast Ukraine. On Wednesday, she was in a car trying to leave with her friends, along with thousands of others queuing up until the road was deemed safe. Well, they got out and all headed to the city of Poltava, about 200 kilometers away. The BBC's Sarah Rainsford reports from there.
Українці народжують насильні Валентині, on this sweet sounding poem is one of our enemies can occupy its school classrooms are called home for now, and the young ones told they post letters for their lives. There are currently 2 weeks from the Russian border, and it's been bombed and shelled for more than a fortnight. So ask Daniel whether he can live in his basement. He tells me we have to run there every day, 3 or 4 times, his mother said. Next week, Russia and Ukraine agreed a short ceasefire to evacuate civilians, but in Syria is actually stuck. We tried to join the safe corridor, but had no time. So I got put in the car with people going to Poltava. We just got in with strangers and left, just like that. I was trying to think black and my husband drove by it. They don't let the man leave. The private leader of the meal on another mattress, somebody's tanker boy was flat on his back, came wearing a front underscore teeth, and the city was those shooting in the local chest. The school, this day number 3 in Poltava, now shelters up to 100 evacuees every night. We came because we are afraid for our lives, because of the planes flying over our heads. They're bombing us. We watched several broken glass. We saw the ruined buildings, the bombing, the roofs ripped off. It was scary. That's why we're fleeing, running as fast as possible from the shooting. trying to save a life, and the children above all. There are no school dinners anymore, just giant sacks of food for families in flight, and for hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers. All the produce is donated, and teachers peel the vegetables, as if normal classes that bring a life for future spending. Katya arrived a couple of days ago from Kharkiv, another northern city in the siege. A 15-year-old's whole life is now carried in one small bag, and its riches put into his hand. There was no safe corridor in Kharkiv, and Katya and his dad decided to make a dash for safety one day at the first light. 10 minutes into packing the car, there was more shelling, and they had to rush back to the basement. Katya's aunt, Oksana, talks a lot about the Russian cycle test. This terrible war that scares her. She thought this war would collapse in 30 seconds, and her son thought never run the store. Her brother thinks the Russians are trying to make people panic, to scare them into submission. Most of the leaders have left Kharkiv now because the bombing is taking almost entering for the year. The city is being destroyed. All the infrastructure, the schools, clinics, the civilians who are suffering. They don't know why they decided to destroy us. Because we resisted them? Because we are united? This is all Russian-speaking Ukraine. The area Vladimir Putin claims it's liberating from oppression. But no one here has to say. Ukrainian family plans to stay put for now, not flee any further. She told me leaving Ukraine would feel like a surrender. And anyway, they've got nowhere to go. My father, he was safe. But we all know that can change in an instant.
Sarah Rainsford reporting from the Ukrainian city of Poltava. Let's hear now from the former Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko. You might remember him. He triumphed a pro-Russian rival, Viktor Yanukovych, in 2004 amid the so-called Orange Revolution, when protests and civil disobedience succeeded in securing another vote after a disputed election had the pro-Russian winning. He's also remembered as the candidate who was poisoned. His face showed the effects. It seemed to be a professional job, although he ultimately managed to recover. He was not power in 2010, and the pro-Russian Yanukovych won it, until the Maidan uprising toppled his government in 2014. The BBC's Evan Davis began by asking Viktor Yushchenko where he is now.
I'm in Ukraine. Around me, war is going on. Around me, there are many cities and towns which are not occupied, but surrounded by Moscow fascists. There are people starving in desperate need of humanitarian aid, but they are not receiving it. Or people who want to leave for safe areas. Perhaps that was the most dangerous night when Moscow fascists bombed several dozens of Ukrainian cities and towns. So these are classic fascists, which are doing ethnic cleansing or a Nazi war.
Did you think President Putin, could you imagine he would ever do this?
Честно кажучи, ні. Я не думав, що I'm speaking now. I even think that he had so many equal features of an animal. How did it happen? Putin is conducting a textbook war, and unfortunately we're only just beginning to assess things he's doing now. We have an extremely weak reaction to what Putin is doing. First of all, the reaction coming from the government. Frankly speaking, I see a big issue at the government level, and many leaders are not in the forefront of this war.
But do you understand, Mr. Yushchenko, why the West has not created a no-fly zone or sent fighter jets into Ukraine? It is the fear of this escalating into a true world war, into a conflict that is much more serious for the whole of Europe.
Yes, well, I will start from saying that 6 wars have been going on in Europe for the past 6 years. Nagorno-Karabakh, Abkhazia, Crimea, Transnistria, Donbass. who are shouting from all possible platforms, why don't you read the situation the way it is? You understand, on the basis of these 6 wars, there is only one problem, one issue, it is Russia. You were president for those 5 years, 2005 to 2007. Do you have any regrets yourself now about what you did wrong? Do you look back and somehow you should have changed the way Ukraine was getting its position between Russia and the European Union? My regret is in terms of security. The statement signed in spring of 2008 that was refuted by the Bucharest NATO summit. It was declined, and it's a shame. I feel ashamed of that because after that, Putin entered Georgia, and 6 years after that, he entered Ukraine. A lot of people are asking, how does this conflict end? And I'm interested in whether you can imagine Ukraine making any concession in a negotiation to get Russian troops out. We know the future is either we push lost Russian soldiers from Ukraine, and that's another option. The war finishes lost Ukrainian heroes.
That's the former Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko. You're listening to the BBC World Service. This is News Out Newsday, but there's more to come in the next 30 minutes.
This is the BBC World Service with the story behind Louis Armstrong's concerts in the former German Democratic Republic.
In post-war communist Germany, loving Germans was dangerous. If you want you have to speak with every person. Well, why don't you take that risk? Yes. So how did the famous American musician come to play a series of concerts behind the Iron Curtain in 1965? I know we're going to have the best. I have a lot of friends right here. Armstrong always told stories of performing in West Berlin, and people would come up to East Berlin to become like Russia, and it always impressed him that these people would kind of put their lives on the line just to go see him. I'm getting their job. I'll find out who pulled the strings to make these legendary concerts happen.
Planet Wars, Eastward, Sunday at 15 GMT.
Coming up on News Hour in the next 30 minutes, we're on the front line with Ukrainian soldiers fighting the Russians in the country's second city, Kharkiv. We hear from a resident in the western city of Lutsk, where an overnight attack by Russia hit the airfield. And as Ukraine says Kiev is at risk of being intercepted by Russian tanks, we'll take a look at Moscow's current military strategy. That's our news. BBC News, I'm Don Schmidt. The G7 group of leading industrialized countries and the European Union want to strip Russia of trade benefits to isolate Moscow further over the war in Ukraine. The latest measures will allow bans or punitive tariffs to be imposed on Russian exports. President Biden said Vladimir Putin must pay the price for aggression. The UN disarmament chief has dismissed allegations by Russia that Ukraine is trying to develop a biological weapon with the help of the United States. Israeli Nagamitsa told the Security Council there was no evidence of such activity. Russia then brought out the gathering there was a network of biological research centers in Ukraine. Ukrainian officials say more than 1,500 civilians have been killed in the besieged city of Mariupol since Russian forces began their bombardment. A spokesman in the city for the International Red Cross has described appalling conditions there. The U.S. State Department says any Russian deployment of Syrian fighters in Ukraine would mark a further escalation of Moscow's unjustified and unprovoked aggression. The spokesman said it would also show that President Putin had made fundamental miscalculations in choosing the path of war over diplomacy. Russia has announced a ban on Instagram, a change of rules by its parent company Meta to allow violent speech in relation to the invasion of Ukraine. The media regulators said the ban would take effect on Monday. Russia said it wanted to protect expressions of self-defense. In other news, the blogger Raif Badawi has been released from prison in Saudi Arabia after completing a 10-year sentence for insulting Islam. His case attracted worldwide attention and he was subjected to 50 lashes in public as part of his punishment.
And a former student leader, Gabriel Boric, has been sworn in as president of Chile. Aged 36, he's the country's youngest head of state. He's promised to overhaul Chile's economy. BBC News.
Welcome back to News Now. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has been an eye-opener to the world's dependence on commodities from the two countries. Wheat, corn, fertilizer, to name a few of those whose production and exports have been disrupted. That is another, neon, critical for the lasers used to make computer chips. Ukraine's two leading companies, which produce half of the world's supply of neon, have halted production as a result of the conflict. And ironically, neon is a byproduct of Russian steel production. Peter Shamroy is president of TechNet, an advisory firm focused on electronic materials technology.
It is used for the special laser passes that are needed for most of these UV lasers that are used to pattern the majority of semiconductor chips that are out there.
So these two companies in Ukraine have stopped producing neon. Presumably it's going to have a massive impact on the semiconductor industry.
Well, they are bracing the chip industry for a shortage. You are right in that these two companies that are in the Ukraine, Ingas and Kryoin, have been interrupted. Ingas is in Mariupol, which is in a very active war zone right now. Depending on how long the war wears on, will have a bearing on whether or not we will see some chip production interruptions.
Where else can chip manufacturers look elsewhere for neon?
China is the other area that makes a lot of neon. The U.S. also has a fair amount of supply, but in terms of additional capacity that can make up for lack of supply coming out of the Ukraine and Russia, that would have to be from China. We are hoping there is capacity in China. We're still looking to validate whether that is true or whether they are just as constrained. Even before the war, due to the chip expansions that are going on and shortage of chips, the drive to make more semiconductor chips has pushed the material supply chains to their capacity. As a result, there is very little capacity left anywhere. Some people have asked me, well, gee, is this going to limit the amount of chips that can be produced in the future? And I would say yes, unless expansion happens very quickly. And in the chemical world, it can take 2 to 3 years to build a new chemical plant. And so we're looking at a lot of strain and stress in the supply chain here. And now the Russia war, on top of that, creates an additional factor that people just really don't need right now.
It just reminds us the kinds of consumer products that chips find their way into.
Yes, your cell phones, your computers, your laptops, they're pervasive everywhere. Your refrigerators, of course, in the most advanced cases, tend to be self-driving cars. So you've talked about how to communicate between San Diego, where I'm at, and England. We're using a lot of chip power right there between server farms and satellites and our own computers.
Peter Shamroy. You're listening to News Hour from the BBC. I'm Julian Marshall. We're now going to hear a report from the fighting on the front line with the Ukrainian army. It's from Kharkiv in eastern Ukraine, the country's second city. A Russian armored column was fought back in the early days of the invasion. Then the city suffered nightly Russian airstrikes and shelling. Most of the city's 1.5 million people have fled. The BBC correspondent Quentin Somerville and cameraman Darren Conway has spent the week with Ukrainian forces as they fight to stop a further Russian advance. Here's a report, and just to warn you that you may find parts of it distressing.
I think this building was hit last night about a block from our hotel, and there was a massive explosion, and the streets devastated in front of me. It's a huge crater. A huge neoclassical building is in ruins, and the small building beside a shattered lamppost is gone, and that's all you can hear is the fire alarm from a nearby hotel. And you know, one of the things I noticed here, there are a lot of comparisons made between wars. But when I look at the faces of the people wandering around here. It's the same expressions that you see in Syria and Iraq and Libya. And those expressions are of humiliation, of fear, and of dreadful anticipation of what's coming next.
My name is Ukrainian. I was done with National Guard for Ukraine.
I'm in an armored truck on the way to the front with Lieutenant Gramatsky. His men are a mix of regular army and volunteers. The closer we get, the louder the shelling.
Over there is the most dangerous part, as our forces are firing and carrying out a special operation to capture Russian soldiers.
This is all civilian walls around here. What are they targeting?
After the Russian forces fired on civilian buildings, we evacuated everyone from this area. Our soldiers are trying to stop the Russian forces from advancing here, and it is strategically important to the defense of the whole city of Kharkiv.
It's really close here. Snow everywhere. Just going through the trenches. Not the very edge of the village. Almost just a Kharkiv. So quiet that Russians are just 300 meters away. Most of the attacks seem to come down. Hail's the unit's medic. He was a civilian until a couple of weeks ago.
My name is Leader. I'm Sergeant of National Guard. My nickname is Reaper.
Reaper, how long Reaper have you been here at front?
Here in front, from first day of war.
How are the Russians fighting?
Well, stupid animals. They fighting like in 1941. Yeah, there are a lot of people, a lot of tanks, a lot of they need to protect us, but we fighting our land and we protect our families. So it doesn't matter how they fight. We fight like wild and they don't do it.
But across Ukraine east, Russian forces are advancing. In central Kharkiv, there are few troops. Most are defending the city's edges. But the war is everywhere here. Russia bombs hospitals. So in this one, patients are being kept in the hallways away from the windows and taken into the intensive care unit. How old is he, doctor? 8 years. You can hear the respirator, which is helping Dmitry. He was at home when a Russian bullet came to the apartment and lodged just below his cranium, just below his brain and by his spinal column. He's stable now, but he's a sorry son. Regardless of age, this war spares no one. 79-year-old Anatoly lies on a bed in the corridor. His face is crisscrossed with stitches, the mark of a cobweb of green intersected lines covering the wounds from a Russian rocket attack. The Russians say that they're not targeting civilians. What do you say to that? That is rubbish. That's a lie. On the first and second floors, all the windows were shattered. It was the same for many, but I was badly injured. So when the Russians say that they don't attack us, it's all right. I'm in a hurry to leave. The curfew soon. More than half of the city's 1.5 million population have fled in the face of the Russian bombardment. But a lady on a bed snags my sleeve. It's 66-year-old Miss Valentina. She's got a piece of Russian shrapnel in her hip, and they can't remove it. But still, she says she will remain here. We've been told this again and again, that if Kharkiv falls, the country's second biggest city, then all of Ukraine falls. I have a poem for you, she says.
Русский осколок. But these stupid Russian shrapnel pieces I will carry all my life. But as long as my heart still beats, I will still live and love. Defend it. We will rise together. We will with us, and all our heroic people will gather to rebuild our beloved Ukraine.
Obviously, correspondent Quentin Somerville and cameraman Darren Conway with that report from the eastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. In the past 24 hours, Russian forces have been expanding their offensive in Ukraine, striking 4 cities in the west of the country. Moscow says it hit military airfields in Lutsk and Ivano-Frankivsk. Elsewhere, the central city Dnipro was hit by 3 Russian airstrikes, damaging a block and kindergarten. Italy is a resident of Lutsk and told me about the overnight airstrike there.
I saw something moving in the direction of the aerodrome from the sky, and just a second or two later, what we all saw was a huge explosion, a fireball which started to climb up me, and because the actual terminal was destroyed, the fumes, the smoke, this very dark black smoke started coming up, and the sky in just a matter of 15 minutes, it practically became dark.
So the Russians hit a very specific target.
I believe so. The bombing was very specific in its nature, and it was directed at the military aerodrome. This terminal, it wasn't of a significant importance to the military. It was not full to its maximum capacity, and I believe that today's actions were aimed at spreading terror amongst civilian population. But in spite of it, our people have become even angrier at Russians, even more fierce and even more eager to fight against them.
But nonetheless, Vitaly, it must make you and the other residents of Lutsk more apprehensive about the future.
We are not just extremely worried, we finally understood that the war that is going on is not just about Kyiv or Kharkiv. No one is safe. No one.
I just wonder whether that overnight strike on the airfield had caused any residents of Lutsk maybe to think of leaving the city.
This idea of leaving the city has been with practically every resident of Lutsk since day one. But I believe that desire or that wish to leave the city is not with our local residents. It is with those refugees and internally displaced people who arrived to Lutsk from other places that were bombed or targeted. Yesterday, of course, I would have said that there is nothing that can be of concern to those who arrived in our city. But now, as a local resident, I am not sure about that.
I was Vitaly, a resident of Lutsk. Well, as well as those airstrikes further west, the large Russian military convoy advancing on the capital, Kiev, from the north appears to be dispersing. And the Ukrainian military says the city now risks being surrounded with Russian tanks moving in from the north and the west. John Spencer is a former U.S. Army major and now chair of urban warfare studies at the Madison Policy Forum. First, does he believe the strikes on military airfields in Lutsk and Ivano-Frankivsk are a sign of a push west by the Russians?
No, I think that there's only one operation that matters, and that's to achieve the strategic goal to take Kyiv. I see this as just part of the operation to continue to create chaos, which includes bringing the military away to help keep humanitarian, because that's what real soldiers do. And to cut off, at least frustrate the open minds of resupply who are coming out of the west that are helping the capital prepare for the battle of Kyiv.
And all the indications are that the Russians are ready for an assault on Kyiv.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, they see all the marshalling we had 2 days ago, the engagement on the west side, now we have engagements on the east side. Amazingly, that was really broken up in the room with that regimental commander, which the Russians can't do this without some strong leadership forcing them into what I call the meat grinder that awaits them.
Why has it taken the Russians so long? I mean, isn't it the convention that if you invade a country, you do try to take the capital first?
Yeah, absolutely. You take it with speed and power. So clearly that's what we tried from the beginning. We tried to use speed over power, which is, it has historical relevance, but they underestimated the Ukrainian military's capability and resistance. The resistance, the will to fight is more important than actual weapons and capability. When they underestimated their own military's ability to do an operation like that. Now they've given the Ukrainians time, and now it's going to be a different positional fight. It's going to really, they have to pay the price that they really want.
What do you make of President Putin's backing for the deployment of fighters from the Middle East alongside Russian forces, and indeed the involvement of mercenaries from the pro-Kremlin Wagner group? Is that because Russian ground forces have become depleted?
Yeah, it was just a desperate move to bubble down. To me, it's about the battle of Kiev, and it's also about time. He's run out of time. So to me, it's just not a desperation, but it is concerning. Those are the Wagner group and some of the fighters coming to Syria, just some hardened, urban fighters. And it is concerning me, even if they're cannon fighters, it's not as if, quantity has become quality. In this case, it's trying to build quantity.
John Spencer, former U.S. Army Major, now Chair of Urban Warfare Studies at the Madison Policy Forum, and author of the forthcoming book, Connected Soldiers, Life, Leadership, and Social Connections in Modern War. This is News Hour.
We return to News Hour shortly. Due to extended news coverage of events in Ukraine, many of our programs have moved around our schedule. At bbcworldservice.com, our talk guest is the exiled Belarusian opposition leader, Frontline.
We don't want to be dragged into the crimes of Soviet Union. We want to be independent country with our own culture, where people are going where they want, and they are not ruled by the big country.
Our story asks what happens if the Russian economy collapses.
There's also a very important thing that's going on, which is self-sanctioning. So in other words, banks themselves are actually preempting what regulators might say and not providing finance into Russia at the moment either.
And here this week, BBC World Football.
So what will happen to the club now? And absolutely no one knows. But I can tell you something, it's incredibly serious.
Now it's back to Julian Marshall and News Hour.
A reminder of our top story this hour. The besieged city of Mariupol in southern Ukraine has suffered bombardment from the Russians for nearly 2 weeks. Today, there was another attempt to get aid to those trapped there, but the country's Deputy Interior Minister, Maria Kopian, told this programme that it hadn't reached the people who so desperately need it.
We were trying to organize and form columns with a white flag. As soon as such an intention is manifested on the Ukrainian part, the Russian army often demonstrated fire from machine guns and mortars on the movement of such columns, forcing people to return to the city.
Also this hour, the G7 group of leading industrialized countries and the European Union are to strip Russia of trade benefits to further isolate Moscow over its war in Ukraine. This is Julian Marshall with News Hour live from the BBC in London. However Ukraine emerges from this war, most Ukrainians say the direction of their country is set. They're determined to face westwards and turn away from Russia. But does that mean disentangling from all things Russian, from cultural and linguistic ties, for example? News Hour's Tim Franks reports from the western city of Lviv, a place that over the centuries has sat on the borders of empires to the east and the west.
The Opera House is empty. This magnificent riot of gold leaf and crimson upholstery, of frescoes and statues, a vast proscenium arch, and an orchestra and choir slowly gathering on stage. This is the Lviv National Opera, and the house band and chorus, who are about to record a stirring choral work by a great Ukrainian composer, Yevgeny Stankovich. It's his piece from 1979, entitled I assert myself. Yasmin Volkan is the artistic director of the Lviv National Opera. We dedicate this symphony to the victory of our army against the Russian fascism. Do you think, at the moment, that you personally would struggle to program Russian music? It depends strictly on who is the personality of the composer. So let's take, for example, Tchaikovsky and his compositions like Nutcracker and Swan Lake or Giovanna. We identify him as a Ukrainian who used to compose under the Tsar regime, and he had nothing to do with politics, right? And we're going to continue playing his pieces, his compositions here. But if the composer is not beyond politics, right? If he participates in some sort of propaganda by Russia, we will expel such places. What happens though when that choice, that tussle is at an even more fundamental level? Daria is a 24-year-old psychologist volunteering here at this small contemporary art centre that's turned itself into another one of these refugee hostels. Her mother is Russian. Daria was born in Russia. She moved to Kharkiv in the east of Ukraine, where almost everyone has Russian as a first language. But now, Daria is trying painfully, deliberately, to wean herself off her mother tongue. Yes, it's my internal decision that I made for myself. As I live in Ukraine and I really love Ukrainian language. I'm trying to speak it, but I'm a bit ashamed of my Russian accent, which gives up that I am originally from there. So the thing is, in terms of psychological aid and my professional work, it doesn't affect, Russian language doesn't affect me as much, but I'm not just that, I also write poetry, I'm a songwriter. To think in Ukrainian, to dream in Ukrainian, how long is it going to take? I think that it might take around 3-4 years for me, as it's a long road. If I want to be able to express my art and my intimate self in Ukrainian as profoundly as in Russian, it will take some time. I find it more compelling, getting motivation for myself to learn Ukrainian, not out of hatred towards Russian language, but more towards love to Ukrainian language. It motivates me more to feel like that. It feels particularly telling to hear about these personal struggles here in Lviv, a city which has seen empires east and west throw their clutches around it. Over the centuries, it swung from the Kingdom of Poland to the Austro-Hungarian Empire to Nazi occupation to the Soviet Union. That's no exhaustive list. Indeed, Lviv is only its most recent name. Even in the 20th century, it was called Lemberg and then Lvov. I've come to meet a woman steeped in those changes. She's the academic Sofia Diak, and she runs this place, the Centre for Urban History in Lviv.
I mean, of course, Ukraine as a country, Ukraine as society, as individual, in the context of war and aggression, is undergoing a tremendous transformation and a tremendous challenge, A, of surviving and B, of thinking who we are, because each day is making us, changes us. But if you speak about moving borders, and borders have been moved several times, it's really painful and really hard to see how it's a big lesson from here that borders, when they are moved in geographies, are really moved in the same time through people's lives, destroying them.
Those are big thoughts for the longer term. Back at the Lviv National Opera House, there are choices to be made right now. Sofia Solovi is a singer, a soprano, who's performed around the world. When I ask her what she feels about performing Russian repertoire at the moment, she clasps her hands and presses them to her breastbone.
Ну, оскільки я є безпосередньо задіяна.
I would say that there can't be no culture beyond politics. I can't use the slogan of culture separate from politics, especially right now. To my deepest grief, I personally believe that I just stay away from Russian pieces, Russian music right now. And the other reason is also that even though these authors have nothing to do with the war, their pieces are weaponized. With that, Sophia leaves to join the chorus on stage to lend her voice to the struggle.
Tim Franks with that report from Lviv in western Ukraine. And that's it from this edition of News Hour. Reminder that you can listen to the program whenever you like. We've got 2 editions a day. You can find the latest online at bbcworldservice.com. But as well, sign up for our free download. Just search for BBC News Hour podcast. From me, Julian Marshall, and the rest of the team in London. Bye.
This is the BBC World Service with psychiatrist Henrietta Bowen-Jones sharing the experiences of people who have left their homelands. My guest is novelist Dina Nayeri, who wrote about being an asylum seeker after escaping Iran. Her stories that I write are displacement and outsiderness, but also welcome. Open doors are my particular joy. That is my identity. Emotional baggage at bbcworldservice.com.